For those uninitiated into this space, natural infrastructure covers a lot of ground. At IST, we define it as on a spectrum. We talk about intentionally protected, restored, and enhanced natural systems that meet service needs. So infrastructure needs, they provide us with key infrastructure benefits, but also provide us with much needed resilience benefits. And our Natural Infrastructure for Water Solutions initiative is focused on the prairies, where we've been making the case that natural infrastructure can be mainstreamed. We can look at natural infrastructure as a way to meet many of our adaptation needs and many co-benefits at lower costs. We see a future where natural infrastructure is just as normal as engineered solutions, where decision makers and others can reach out and find these natural infrastructure solutions for water quality issues, for source water protection, for hazard risk reduction, and much more. To help us understand natural infrastructure and what's happening in the prairie-wide space, I have an exciting panel of 3 speakers this morning. The first of our speakers is Chuck Deschamps, who's a policy analyst with Ducks Unlimited Canada, working out of the Wadena office. With an academic background in wildlife management, his 34-year conservation career has been on wetlands and waterfowl conservation projects in all 3 prairie provinces. Chuck has helped farmers and ranchers adopt conservation farm programs such as marginal area restoration, grazing management, wetland restoration. And over the past 15 years or so, Chuck has been with Ducks Unlimited Canada's Industry and Government Relations Department, working with government, NGOs, landowners, and concerned citizens advocating for wetland conservation and native prairie conservation through stakeholder engagement, policy, and legislation. Chuck's presentation today is called Conserving and Restoring Wetlands and Grasslands for Climate Resilience. Thank you, Chuck. Please help me welcome Chuck to the stage.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you. Yes, thanks to ClimateWest for the opportunity to come and talk about natural infrastructure and Ducks Unlimited. Before I begin, I do want to acknowledge that we are on treaty territory and that we are all treaty people. So just a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about, basically who Ducks Unlimited is, what are those benefits that were referred to that we get from wetlands, how they help us with climate change and resilience, and how Ducks Unlimited has worked on the landscape to sort of implement some of those conservation actions. So I don't have the Mentimeter set up, but I'm sure probably a few people in the room know about Ducks Unlimited. Show of hands, who has heard of Ducks Unlimited before? Oh, I'm speaking to the choir then. So we've been around for over 80 years. Our first project in Saskatchewan was the Waterhead Marsh out by Canisido. And we pride ourselves on partnering. We partner with landowners, with industry, with government. We are very much a science-driven organization. We have our own research institute called IWWR. And of course, we focus on wetlands. Now, when most people think about wetlands, they might think of that cattail pond with a bit of open water. But wetlands are far more dynamic than that. In the Prairie Pothole region, we're looking at wetlands that can exist for a few days to a couple weeks to more permanent wetlands. So there's a whole range in the prairies. You start going up into the boreal forest, you're looking at peatlands and fens and bogs, quite a diverse system. And as we saw yesterday with changes in climate, and especially in the prairies where our climate is so variable to begin with, those wetlands are very dynamic. So if you look at the one picture on the right, that's the same wetland just in different years. So they can go from a flooded state to dried out, and they've actually evolved to that. So they're actually fighting climate change before we even, set foot in this area. They also are very connected to the landscape. They're connected to the natural vegetation around them. Native prairie, wetlands are connected to aspen bluffs, parklands. So they're very part of the whole ecosystem. So what do wetlands do for us? Well, it's tough to put a price tag on all that because if you had to pay for it, it would be very expensive. They do provide specific goods like fresh water, fish, forage, wildlife, but they provide an abundance of services, things like water for purification, waste treatment. They remove contaminants from our drinking water. They store carbon. They're significant stores of carbon. They fight flood and drought. They provide habitat. They provide pollinator habitat, pollinators for crops. With wetlands, I've heard that canola crops with wetlands associated with them can see an increase of about 10% in yield just by having wetlands associated with the crop. And they also provide us with lots of recreational opportunities as well as aesthetics. Specifically on climate change and carbon storage, they're one of the best tools we have to store carbon in the prairies. They also have a net cooling effect in their local area. So they act like little mini refrigerators on the landscape. And if we look at sort of how they compare to other habitats, you can see that they are by far the greatest storer of carbon. And I should mention a lot of these slides that I'm showing up, there are references that will be shared afterwards, so you can check those out and get more information if you'd like. One way I would specifically have you look at is this recent study that came out, or soon to be released, that was initiated by the National Farmers Union. And they looked at sort of what happens to carbon stores when we drain wetlands. We've lost about 50% of our wetlands in Saskatchewan, and we continue to lose wetlands in Saskatchewan and throughout the prairies. They estimate, we lose probably tens of thousands of acres of wetlands annually. So they looked at that and sort of looked at the model, calculated sort of carbon store versus carbon loss, and sort of what happens. We know that there, in some cases there are greenhouse gases like methane that are emitted. So factoring all that in, what is the net effect? Even after, you're seeding a crop and there's zero till that's storing carbon afterwards, what is the net effect? About 10% of agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions come from draining wetlands every year. And that's not even factored into any of the greenhouse gas calculations for our carbon footprint. So a significant source of carbon when we drain wetlands. They also really do a great job at removing contaminants and nutrients from our water. Anyone that's from the prairies know we get most of our runoff in the spring from snowmelt. And then we also, if we get huge storms, inches of rain at a time, those wetlands can store that water and then gradually release it like a sponge. They also recharge our groundwater as well. Just an example of how that works on the landscape, in an intact landscape where we have no drainage. Most of Saskatchewan historically is what they call non-contributing, which means that when the water runs off the land, it doesn't end up in a river or a lake. It stays on the land, and that's typically in a wetland. However, when you drain a wetland, you've created connectivity to the creeks, to the lakes, to the rivers, and you've increased that contributing area. And the net result is when we have large runoff or we have heavy rains, we get flooding downstream. And this just illustrates how that works. So you can see in the diagram there, the dark green area is the contributing area. But as you slowly drain wetlands, that increases that contributing area. So you're sending more and more water downstream, going faster, more volume. A very good source of information if you're looking for sort of a good summary of all the benefits that wetlands provide. This was come out of the folks over at Global Water Futures and Prairie Waters and some other folks at the U of S. And an article as well called To Be Resilient, Prairies Need Wetlands. And they went through sort of all those benefits that I've started to mention and really quantified just how great they are and why we need wetlands on the prairies. So why is it important? Well, as you saw from some of the benefits, having wetlands on the landscape provides us a lot of services. If we incorporate those wetlands into our decision making, it makes better decisions. We can sustain those benefits that are provided. It's also more cost effective than building structures. And typically when we build things to provide us benefits, they're single function. Whereas if you work with a wetland, you get multiple benefits besides just the one you're trying to benefit from. So it's building with nature instead of building with concrete. So how does Ducks Unlimited do this? Well, we partner lots, and we do everything we can to try to restore or enhance our natural environment. So we restore drained wetlands, we protect the wetlands that are currently existing. We work with farmers and ranchers to seed marginal areas back to grass, land that's not really productive for cropland, but by having that grass back on the land, they make more money, sequesters carbon, provides all kinds of environmental benefits. We work with cities and towns in urban setting to develop natural stormwater reservoirs. And we also work with intensive livestock operations to control nutrient loads. We've been around for over 85 years, and our history is water control structures. When Ducks was set up, they had the ambitious goal of drought proofing the prairies. They thought that they could do that in a couple of years, and we're still at it. So we have a very rich history and knowledge about wetlands and wetland restoration. We offer a whole suite of programs to producers, everything from managed nesting cover to wetland restoration, as I mentioned, just a whole variety of things. And you can learn more about those at ducks.ag. In an urban setting, our two sort of prime examples is McKell-Wascana Park here in Regina, as well in Saskatoon. We have the Chapel Marsh and the Hyde Park. I won't steal anyone's thunder here, so you'll be hearing more about those later. We've also created a coalition called Nature Force, which is a coalition with some of the Canadian insurance companies to try and address some of the major issues around insurance and infrastructure damage. And so one example we have is the work we're doing in Quebec. There's a town there that floods quite frequently. And so we're working upstream to restore a bunch of those wetlands. When you think of that graphic that I had, sort of putting that water back on the landscape to reduce the amount of water coming downstream, reduce those floods when they get a major rain event. We also created natural and native plant solutions. We had a real need for native seed when we were establishing nesting cover, and you couldn't buy it anywhere, so we developed our own. And now we've created a for-profit company that works with villages, towns, cities to restore native areas back, and just a list of some of the things they do there. In Saskatchewan, one of the big projects was we worked with the Nature Conservancy to restore over 1,000 acres back to native grassland. We helped develop bioplatforms, those floating cattail systems that are in lagoons and city ponds that remove nutrients, reduce algae. And just to sum up, one of the sort of the really good ones that I've seen out there, this was relatively recently, the city of Yorkton, they had to build a new water treatment plant, and they had a green space on the south side of town. So what they did was when they built their water treatment plant, they incorporated wetlands into that treatment plant. So rather than sending the water then they filter out or flush their filters into their sewage system, they send it into a wetland. The wetland treats the water. It provides habitat. It's an aesthetic area. They have trails. It's basically a park. And it also recharges the groundwater, which is where Yorkton gets its water, is from the aquifer. So it's a very good example of how to incorporate green infrastructure into an urban setting. So then just to sum up, as you can see, wetlands provide a whole range of natural infrastructure, and you'll be hearing more about that in the presentations that follow, but it just makes sense to work with nature and work with wetlands. They save money. They reduce a lot of the damages that we can experience from climate change, and we are experiencing. They protect us. They retain carbon, like I mentioned, and they promote tourism. So with that, if you want to learn more, do visit us at ducks.ca. We have a wealth of resources there. I know we talked about youth yesterday, and we actually have a climate change resource pack there. So check us out, and by all means, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chuck. I think we have time for questions. You did very well on your time. So I'm going to look first maybe in the room for any folks moving towards the microphones or putting your hands up. I see someone. Come on back, Chuck.
Hi, good morning, Chuck. Thanks for that presentation. My background's architecture, but my husband happens to be a farmer, and we do know there is a lot of disputing between neighbors in the community when we do have farming that's trying to encourage the retention of wetlands. And it does seem to be a financial disadvantage at this point to do so. And it is a struggle to keep up on a financial case. So I'm wondering what kind of enforcement that you are aware of, or, you know, other organizations that are maybe working to support enforcing water retention.
Yeah, that's a challenging question. Most people don't realize that in Saskatchewan, wetlands or the water that's in them belongs to the public. So you need a license or a permit from the Water Security Agency to drain. Unfortunately, that hasn't been enforced very well. The vast majority of drained wetlands that we see on the landscape are done without an approval. And the Water Security Agency is trying to change that. But the system that's currently in place is a complaint-based system. So if you are affected by this drainage, then you have to basically complain against your neighbor, and it creates all kinds of issues. So yeah, I know Ducks does have incentives to help producers retain wetlands. Unfortunately, our province doesn't have those. Other provinces like Manitoba and Alberta do, and it would be great to see those come to Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan currently remains the only province without a wetland conservation policy. So there is work that needs to be done. And I think, you know, we need to demonstrate to producers and reward producers for retaining and being good stewards of the land that they are, and retaining those wetlands on the landscape, because they provide benefits not only to them, but to society as a whole.
Questions?
Hi there. As a follow-up to that one, given that it's in our political climate, it's being unpopular position to take to enforce those provisions against farmers. What advice would you offer to the provincial government trying to develop a policy like that to not alienate farmers?
I think, you know, we can have our cake and eat it too in some respects. Probably the biggest challenge we have with a lot of the existing policies is the lack of sort of adequate mitigation. So I know, for example, in Manitoba, you know, you can drain a wetland, that's not illegal. But when you do that, you have to replace that wetland. And so, you know, we've lots of drainage already in this province. So if we sort of operated on sort of a no net loss basis, so no more loss going forward, let's make good land use decisions. Let's support those farmers that see a real benefit for draining wetlands, but then replace those benefits in the same area by restoring wetlands that are already drained. So there can be a win-win there. It doesn't have to always be the hammer. There's, you know, the stick works very well, and there's lots of opportunity to reward producers. And there's lots of producers out there, and you'll hear from some of them this afternoon that, you know, see a real value in having wetlands on their farm. So.
Thank you for that. We do have a couple of online questions if you want to take a quick look and see if one stands out. We have time for one more.
Okay. Wow, so many choices. Wetlands and grasslands are important in nature's carbon and water cycle, but they do not permanently retain, sequester carbon. This is not a permanent solution. So that's false. Wetlands store carbon in the soil. So, and that's permanent. And they've been around, you know, since the glaciers retreated. So they've been storing carbon for a very long time. And when they're drained and cultivated repeatedly year after year, all that carbon isn't released at once. It's released over time. And getting those carbon sinks back, we can restore wetlands quite easily. But that carbon cycle takes a long time to reestablish.
Thank you, Chuck. A great reminder that the work of Ducks Unlimited Canada and wetland restoration spans boundaries very well. We have a lot of wetland restoration work going on on rural landscapes. And now for our next presentation, we're going to move to the city of Saskatoon. Our next speaker is Jessie Best. Jessie is project manager at the City of Saskatoon and has been working on natural areas and green network initiatives for the city. As a professional agrologist, she has a keen interest in applying conservation principles in urban environments. And the favorite part of her job is engaging with and learning from the various community members and groups who are working to support nature in the city. Jessie's presentation today is Progress on Natural Infrastructure and Asset Management at the City of Saskatoon. Come on over, Jessie.
Just waiting for my slides to come up there. All right. Okay. Thanks so much, Dimple. And thank you to the ClimateWest team for inviting the city's Green Network team to come and speak with you today. So I'm part of the Green Network team for the city of Saskatoon, and I'll define a little bit more about what the Green Network is shortly. But before I get into too many details, I just really wanted to emphasize both now and throughout my presentation that efforts to protect and manage the Green Network are very much a collaborative effort between multiple city departments, including sustainability, which is where our team is housed, but also planning and development, parks, Indigenous initiatives, and multiple other departments. As well as multiple community organizations and groups, residents, rights holders, businesses, and various other entities who are working, various levels of government, I should mention as well, who are working to protect and enhance natural infrastructure in Saskatoon. And so I'll be speaking more on the city's perspective and some of the work that the city has been doing in this area. But also just wanted to give a big shout out to all of the other groups and individuals who are working in this realm as well. It's also very important to acknowledge the history of the land. So just wanted to do a brief treaty acknowledgement, just in the context of the work that we do on the Green Network, because we are interacting with the landscape. The work that we're doing is very much land-based. And the natural infrastructure, the green spaces around Saskatoon and near Saskatoon, such as Wanuskewin Heritage Park, are important gathering spaces for many different First Nations and Métis communities since time immemorial. And so in the work that we do, we've been trying to increase our understanding of the needs of these groups and to reflect work with them to reflect their histories, their stories, and their needs in the work that we're doing. I know most of you are very much acquainted with Saskatoon already, but for those of you who aren't or who might be joining online from other regions, just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the ecological context for Saskatoon. So we are part of the moist mixed grassland and aspen parkland ecoregions. We're just on the boundary between the two. So as Chuck discussed, we're very much a landscape of fluctuating wet and dry conditions, cycles, and then of course heat and cold is also a major factor in our landscape as well. Of course, the South Saskatchewan River winds through the city. It provides drinking water to both Saskatoon residents as well as multiple other surrounding communities, in addition to all of the other services that it provides. And the city is also home to many different species and wildlife, including species at risk and species of concern, like monarch butterflies and northern leopard frogs, just to name a couple. And as Chuck discussed, we're very much part of the prairie pothole region. At our last count in 2019, there was over 1,200 hectares of wetlands that could be found in city limits. And so wetlands are a big part of the work that we're doing and trying to work with water on the landscape. Saskatoon is also home to several swale complexes, which I won't talk about too much because I think Renny will be, but the Northeast Swale is one of our most famous swale systems. And the city and Meewasin have partnered to protect and manage this space. And we're also home to several afforestation areas. These are modified landscapes. They were planted with drought-tolerant trees and shrubs back in the 1970s. And then they were mostly left to their own devices for the last 50 or so years. But today, thanks to the dedicated efforts of volunteer groups who are kind of taking on some of the stewardship of this area, we're starting to look more into the management of these spaces, understand the value that they're providing to the city, and how we can better conserve and manage these sites. Moving into more built-up areas of the city, our parks and formal green space network makes up about 5% of the total city footprint. These spaces are, of course, very, very important for providing our residents with access to nature, access to green space for recreation, and so on. But they also provide a myriad of other co-benefits, such as supporting our stormwater management. So this is a great example of a partnership. So this is Hyde Park. When this neighborhood was being built, Ducks Unlimited was really advocating for the conservation of wetlands in this area. And so the wetlands that were on site were designed to be incorporated into our stormwater management system. And then the surrounding area was naturalized. And so Hyde Park is now part of our naturalized park program. In addition to trees that are in forested areas and along the river valley, the city is also home to about 110,000 trees in public spaces like boulevards, medians, parks, and civic facilities that are managed by the city's Parks Department. And that's not even mentioning the thousands of trees that can be found in residents' yards that residents are involved in stewarding. In 2019, the estimated value of the public trees in the city was estimated to be more than $530 million. And the urban trees, the value of the canopy probably cannot be fully expressed in terms of the full benefits that it provides in terms of shade and biodiversity and helping to sequester carbon and things like that. So in 2019, we worked with Meewasin to prepare an inventory of the green network. It's called the Natural Areas Inventory, but it talks about more than just our natural areas. So all of the natural infrastructure that I discussed so far, plus a number of other assets that I don't have time to talk too much about today, collectively make up what we call the green network. And the 2019 inventory, while numbers have changed over time, at the time, the inventory found that the green network accounts for just under half of the city's footprint. So it's quite a large proportion of the total city. So over a number of years, there were various efforts to protect and manage the natural infrastructure and the green network in the city. These eventually culminated in the development of the Green Infrastructure Strategy, and shortly thereafter, its implementation plan called Green Pathways, which were presented and approved by Council in the last 5 or so years. So why are we focusing on managing and protecting the green network? Well, unlike our built assets, natural infrastructure often provides services in perpetuity. Much of it actually increases in value over time rather than depreciating. And it provides many, many benefits. It provides wildlife habitat and biodiversity, which is so essential in this time of biodiversity loss. It supports cultural and community activities like recreation and education, cultural uses and ceremonial uses. It helps to make our city safer through shade and cooling. Its management supports compliance with regulations such as the Weed Control Act. And it supports economic activity like tourism. We also know that managing natural infrastructure is a really key tool in our toolbox of climate adaptation and mitigation actions. Many of the city's climate action team are here today, so there's a whole host of additional mitigation actions that the city is working on in addition to this work. So this is one slice of the pie. But we know that natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions can really increase carbon sequestration and storage, while also helping us to adapt to climate change through improved stormwater mitigation and helping to mitigate extreme temperatures and things like that. But at the same time, climate change is putting in our green network under increasing pressure. Future climate conditions are expected to lead to damage and loss of natural infrastructure through more flooding and drought cycles, heat and drought stress. And so the use of resilient species and climate considerations in our work is really key as we plan the green network going forward. In some cases, the value of the green network can be expressed in financial terms. I should make sure to clarify here that ecosystem service valuation is not an attempt to put a price tag on nature itself, because we understand nature to be intrinsically valuable and its worth to be incalculable. But understanding the value that the services that nature provides can really help us put in context why its management is so important. Because we can't always replace the services of natural infrastructure with something that we build. So in 2020, we completed a preliminary service valuation for 2 sites, the Small Swale and Richard St. Barbaker Afforestation Area. And when these results were extrapolated to similar natural infrastructure across Saskatoon, we found that the green network provides an estimated $48 million annually in services to the city. And due to limitations with the study, this was likely a very conservative estimate, and the true value is likely much higher. And now this year, with funding support from ClimateWest, we're doing a second assessment. We're still in the early days, so I can't report on any results of that work just yet. But if you're interested, you can come find me afterwards and we can chat. But this time around, we're focusing more on the role that natural infrastructure plays in climate adaptation efforts. So specifically, how does our natural infrastructure contribute to temperature mitigation, carbon sequestration, and carbon storage, both in present day and in future projected climate scenarios? And we're also working to do spatial analysis to better understand the distribution of the green network and how its benefits are kind of allocated across the city. And so through this work, we're starting to apply an equity lens to this work. We've had some previous collaboration with the David Suzuki Foundation and a consultant, Habitat. My colleague Genevieve will speak more on that a little bit later. And I just want to, I know that I have very little time left, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the specific projects and initiatives that we've been working on to advance natural infrastructure. So one of our first priorities is to protect and manage some of the remaining significant natural areas that are in the city. So last year, City Council approved natural area management plans for 2 sites, the Small Swale and Richard St. Barbaker, which I mentioned earlier. And these plans provide guidance for how the city can conserve the important ecological and cultural features of these sites, while providing some recommendations for how the public can use these sites as well as future enhancements. We're also working on what we're calling a natural asset framework. This sounds a little bit abstract, but essentially we're trying to incorporate natural infrastructure into the city's asset management system. And so just like our built infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, and things like that are included in asset management systems that help to ensure that we're not just building a bridge. I'm using Broadway Bridge today as one example because that's top of mind for a lot of folks. We don't just invest in the building of a bridge, we also invest in its renewal and maintenance to make sure that its lifespan can be maximized. And so we need to take the same approach with our natural infrastructure and invest in its full life cycle, from planting and establishment to restoration work to ongoing maintenance and resource management. And that's what the asset management system will help us to enact. We're also working on a natural area policy and process framework. So this will help us to implement regulations, policies, and internal procedures that will allow us to better identify, prioritize, and conserve some of the important natural areas that remain in the city, wetlands and grasslands and forests. There was a report to committee last January that outlined some of the city's current approaches to regulations in this area, as well as some of the gaps. And so the team at the city is currently working to explore a potential natural area policy, as well as updates to our existing wetland policy, among a number of other policy tools that are being explored. We also have a park upgrade program at the city, which is starting to incorporate green network and climate considerations into the prioritization and upgrade process. Starting last year, we had some federal funding through the Natural Infrastructure Fund, which was able to fast track park upgrades in about 12 locations throughout the city. And through a different federal funding stream, we're also working to implement our flood control strategy, which is going to help us by investing in 9 dry storm ponds that reduce the risk of flooding in some of Saskatoon's most flood-prone areas. So the design of these ponds allows them to still be used as a park space most of the time, but during extreme rain events, they can capture and divert stormwater from the surrounding neighborhoods. Last year, City Council enacted a tree protection bylaw, which provides enforcement mechanisms that prohibit injury and destruction of city trees. We're supporting residents to implement natural infrastructure in smaller public spaces, including through our boulevard garden guidelines. And this summer, we're also planting 2 food forest pilots at Boughton and Leif Erikson parks. These are sites that will include a variety of fruit-producing trees and shrubs like apples and haskaps. Our Parks Department will maintain these food forests, but we're also hoping to include the community in the ongoing stewardship of these sites. So the last slides just kind of provided a snapshot of just a few of the things that the city and its partners have been working on. To further support this work, in 2021, Saskatoon was one of 6 cities to receive federal funding through the Natural Infrastructure Fund through Infrastructure Canada, which is providing up to $20 million to support activities like tree planting, park upgrades, and naturalization in 60 locations across Saskatoon. Many of the initiatives that I discussed today and more are being supported by this funding. And then finally, we have a Green Network campaign underway, which is hoping to raise awareness of the Green Network throughout the community. So you might see artwork like this pop up at bus shelters and malls this summer. And yeah, just wanted to mention if you'd like to hear more information, you can check out our website at saskatoon.ca/green network. There's a quiz available about the Green Network if you want to test your knowledge. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to the forum organizers and everyone for your time today. That's all for me.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Fantastic presentation about leadership taken by a city to do everything we talk about in some of our reports. You've accessed the Natural Infrastructure Fund. You're restoring, protecting, enhancing, and doing much more. We'll maybe flip the order of questions. We do have some time for questions, so come on back, Jessie. And we'll see if we start with the online questions. Do you want to take that one? What changes did the park upgrades include?
Yeah, so it really depended on the specific park, but in a lot of cases, we were really trying to emphasize increasing the natural infrastructure in our existing park spaces. So a lot of the upgrades included naturalization, tree planting, as well as improving public access to the park. So in some cases, there were trail upgrades and playgrounds and things like that. But our team is kind of sitting over in that corner if anybody would like to talk more about that.
Thank you. I did not notice which one of you
Go ahead.
came first. Hank.
Thank you. Thank you, Dimple. Thank you, Jessie. Hank Vanema, Strategic Systems Engineering from Winnipeg. Jessie, does Saskatoon have a combined sewer overflow issue?
Oh, I was working on this a couple of years ago and now my mind's going blank. We have a separate sewer system, right?
Fully separated
Right?
system?
Yeah. It's a separate system, which is a huge benefit to us.
It's a
Yeah.
huge benefit, because I'm wondering about this sort of scale up of, infiltration systems, dry ponds and such for other cities that don't have separated sewers as a way to mitigate combined sewer overflow. And I'm just wondering if apparently it's not an issue for Saskatoon, but it would be yet another benefit for some cities.
Yeah,
Mitigate your
absolutely.
CSO issues. Anyway,
Yeah, I know that that's a big challenge that a number of other cities are encountering, and I can't speak to that in a lot of detail, but I know that there's colleagues at the city that that can, and I could help to connect you with them if you'd like to learn more.
thank you very much, Jessie.
Jessie, for the question. Jack Guo from Connecticut Risk, and I also happen to deal with a lot of asset owners. So when you show the asset management slide, I can't help but be curious. Can you speak to some of the biggest challenges that you face as the municipal government in terms of managing the natural asset and built assets for that matter? What are the challenges in incorporating resilience and climate change into the asset management system or implementing the asset management system?
Well, that's a big question that I might have a hard time doing justice in a short amount of time, but I will say that the city is still in its early days of working on our incorporating our natural infrastructure into the asset management system. So we've done some work around an inventory. We're working on some valuation work as well. But there's still quite a bit of work to be done in terms of assessing the condition of our assets and integrating the life cycle costs into our budgets and financial systems. So those are some of the areas that we're still working on, and it's a fun challenge, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Certainly is. Thank you.
I don't know if we have any online questions, but I see another. Go ahead, Virginia. I don't see the online.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very good. I was wondering with our drought and floods and all that kind of stuff and increasing insect activity and insects we haven't seen before, you've noticed any changes in insect activity or declining tree development due to our hotter winters?
Yeah, I might have to defer to the city's entomologists and our urban forestry team to provide a more detailed response. But I do know that in addition to Dutch elm disease, we're also seeing an increase in things like cottony ash psyllid, which really affected the city's ash tree populations a few years ago. And we're starting to try and better prepare for that potential influx of novel pests and diseases that might impact the urban tree canopy. We're starting to look at how we can plant potentially more resilient tree species and a greater variety of trees as well, so that if a new pest does come through that impacts one specific species, it's not going to necessarily wipe out a huge swath of the canopy.
Thank you, Jessie. Again, we're big fans of the city of Saskatoon. I'm not just saying that because I'm here. We've been highlighting how Saskatoon is a prairie champion in taking natural infrastructure from novel to normal. So this was a very exciting presentation indeed. Our next speaker is Renny Grilz. Renny is a resource management officer at Meewasin Valley Authority and has nearly 3 decades of experience in conservation and climate adaptation across the 3 prairie provinces. He leads work in ecological restoration, ecosystem management, and sustainable land use in the Saskatoon region. And his approach emphasizes nature-based solutions and collaborative stewardship to strengthen climate resilience across South Saskatchewan River Valley. Renny is involved with numerous boards and organizations, including the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds, and he's a founding member of the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange, which is quite timely. I'm going to throw this one in. Sitting at the table with Renny, he described himself as a boots on the ground kind of guy, so that's another part of his bio. His presentation today is Restoring and Managing Natural Infrastructure, Tools for a Resilient Prairie Landscape. Welcome, Renny.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Dimple. And yeah, thank you everyone for ClimateWest for asking me to join today on behalf of Meewasin Valley Authority. And it's a great pleasure to be at the speaking with both Chuck and Jessie. I've had a privilege to work with them for multiple years throughout my career. So it's been a lot of fun working with them. So what I'm going to talk about today is that boots on the ground aspect of we build or manage these natural infrastructure pieces, urban or suburban areas as well. But how do we make sure that they remain to be healthy and resilient going into the future? So a little bit about the Meewasin Valley Authority. We were created in 1979 through an act through the provincial government called the Meewasin Valley Act. And as an organization, we are a partnership between the City of Saskatoon, the University of Saskatchewan, and the province of Saskatchewan. We had, back in 1978, architect Raymond Moriyama came to Saskatoon with his team. Raymond Moriyama is famous for projects from around the world. He built the War Museum in Ottawa and several other beautiful architecture pieces. But he also developed the 100-year plan for Meewasin Valley Authority, which sort of set the stage for what you see within the Saskatoon region and set the stage for this beautiful green network and infrastructure that we have around Saskatoon. Within Meewasin Valley Authority, we're responsible for 6,700 hectares of land. About 60% of our jurisdiction, or the land that our jurisdiction is within city limits. The remainder is outside the city limits in the R. McCormick Park. We look after roughly 90 kilometers of river valley throughout the city and north and south of the city as well. We're also Canada's largest urban conservation zone. So if you look at some of the work that's being done in other parts of Canada, when you look at the size of our jurisdiction and the work that we're doing, we become the largest. Also in 2021, the federal government through Parks Canada is looking at a series of national urban parks within Canada, and Saskatoon has been selected as one of those potential cities. And so Meewasin, with our partners, including the City of Saskatoon, R. McCormick Park, and other stakeholders, are exploring this opportunity to create a national urban park within the Saskatoon region. And we're going to be engaging with public stakeholder engagement later this summer with a goal to hopefully designate this national urban park by next spring. Within our mandate is a healthy, vibrant river valley. But we need to also balance that human use and that conservation. And that becomes that challenge, right? So when the Moriyama Plan was written in 1978, it projected the growth of Saskatoon within the 100 years by 2078 of 250,000 people. The greater Saskatoon region now is at 350,000 people. So trying to balance that human use and that conservation can be quite challenging. So we have a three-pronged mandate, provide conservation of these natural spaces and the river valley within Saskatoon, provide education opportunities and engage the public on the value of the valley and the conservation values, but also the development aspect as well. So as Meewasin, if you got to explore the river valley yesterday, when we had the opening prayer yesterday, we were actually at our skating rink. The ice is out, of course, it's summertime, but that's the Meewasin skating rink in the wintertime. And then right behind that is our network of trails throughout the Saskatoon area. But also, we also have a development mandate we have a development review process that any projects that occur within the river valley, they come through our development review process and also through our board for approval. And quite often, those recommendations that come through the development process look at trying to balance that conservation and human use as well. So part of my job with Meewasin is leading these conservation programs on the ground and these resource management programs. And the natural infrastructure that we look after within the Saskatoon region are those swales that Jessie talked about, grasslands, wetlands, those riparian areas, creeks as well. And they all form that critical portion of that natural infrastructure. They provide critical carbon storage, stormwater management, biodiversity, and then also resilience to any extreme weather events that we have, whether it's those extreme colds, those extreme droughts, and those extreme rain events. But one of the challenges is that these sites have to be actively managed. It's one thing to protect a site and just leave it sit. But as over time, they slowly degrade. And so an active management approach is needed to keep these areas healthy and vibrant and to be fully functional. Just a little known fact, here in Saskatchewan, we have less than 14% of our native grasslands remaining. So in the last 125 years, we've lost grasslands and we continue to lose grasslands. And so whether it's within urban areas, rural areas, we're still losing our grasslands. And those grasslands that are remaining are under threat as well for other things like invasive species and other impacts. Our grassland ecosystems here in the prairies evolved under sort of three main ecological processes. So the climate, so the drought cycle that we're in now, 15 years ago, we were in a wet cycle. The cold winters, the hot, dry summers, those help formed our prairie grasslands and those deep, thick roots that we have that provide critical carbon storage. But also they evolved under grazing and fire. So historically, we would have had plains bison roaming the northern Great Plains or the Great Plains from Texas to northern Alberta, with estimates of 60 to 100 million bison grazing this area. We've lost the bison, generally across the grasslands, but we replace them with cattle and other grazers. So that keeps those grasslands healthy. But also our grasslands evolved under a fire cycle as well, either natural fires or actually human set fires. And there's a lot of work and stories that have been shared by Indigenous elders that fire was an important use of these landscapes. Here in the Saskatoon region, fire would have naturally occurred in our grasslands on a 7 to 15-year cycle. South of Winnipeg, about 1 to 3 year cycle. Again, to southern Saskatchewan, southern Alberta, maybe on that 20 to 30-year cycle. So it is a natural part of our ecosystem. So, in the news, we've, and all the smoke that we've seen here in Western Canada is a result of wildfire smoke. And, that's front of mind. And so when I start talking to people about prescribed fire, people get, oh, we're in the middle of wildfire season. Why are you talking about prescribed fire and what's the difference? So, wildfire is a catastrophic event where everything goes wrong. A fire, it's unplanned, fire gets started, and you don't have the situation to get it under control and put it away or lock it down. And you don't have the resources to put it out and to capture that fire. On a prescribed fire, though, this takes years of planning. You have the site prepared, you have a very set prescription of when you want to burn, how you want to burn, whether specific weather conditions, smoke management conditions, but also ecological or agronomic factors that you plan into those burns as well. And you can see the slide, both slides. The top picture is actually Fort McMurray from a few years ago, and this is actually a prescribed fire down at Grasslands National Park about 10 years ago. You can see that difference in flame length and heat. Fort McMurray was a catastrophic event, really severe weather conditions. Typically prescribed fires we burn with a lot cooler temperatures, no wind, and high relative humidity. So restoration is a key fundamental part of these natural systems. And restoration is used to help degrade and improve these systems. And it could take different ways to do restoration. And it could use simple things like taking native seed and planting it down to create a native grassland, or reestablishing ecological processes like grazing and fire and that hydrology on those sites. Could involve removing invasive species, also reconstructing habitat features for wildlife and pollinators, and then also that long-term monitoring and adaptive management to learn from what we've been doing and to make it better going forward. Invasive species are actually the #2 threat to biodiversity worldwide. The first threat to biodiversity worldwide is habitat loss. The second threat is invasive species. I just read a paper this morning when I got up that came out talking about the cost of managing invasive species worldwide since the 1960s is estimated at $2.2 trillion. And estimates over the next 50 years are going to see that triple. And so invasive species can be everything from those forest tree pests, could be wild boar, could be plant species as well. And so the cost to society is humongous. And it's also a huge cost to these natural infrastructure systems. And there's not one easy solution to deal with invasive species, and you have to use that integrated approach, whether it's herbicides and hand pulling and mowing, grazing, fire, biocontrol agents. Not one tool is sort of the ultimate tool. It's using that combination of tools to be successful. One of the things that a lot of urban areas have been looking at is using targeted grazing for vegetation management. This is a flock of sheep grazing at the Northeast Swale that Jessie showed that lovely air photo of. And it's using these animals to bring back these natural processes of natural disturbance, but using them to meet specific management objectives, whether it's invasive species control, shrub control, or actually trying to enhance habitat for wildlife species. But it's also tying back agriculture to that urban area as well, and getting people connected back to where their food comes from. A lot of cities have been adopting targeted grazing programs with sheep, goats, or cattle. And we also started doing this work about 25 years ago. And now we're seeing other cities doing it as well, which is very exciting to see. The use of prescribed fire. We've been fortunate here in the Saskatoon region. Meewasin, the city of Saskatoon, and the University of Saskatchewan have been using fire as a management tool for over 30 years in partnership. And fire can be used for multiple ways to enhance these grasslands, but also it could be a tool for wildfire risk reduction as well. And so we're starting to see other urban areas looking at fire as a management tool. Winnipeg's been using it for over 30 years. City of Edmonton has just started doing their prescribed fire program last fall, where they're using it as a wildfire risk mitigation. And we have other cities like Lethbridge, Regina, Moose Jaw that are discussing with us on how they can apply fire as a safe way to reduce wildfire risk and meet their management objectives. So this is a little picture of a prescribed fire that we held at Beaver Creek Conservation Area south of the city. This was part of a training exercise where we had people from across Western Canada join us. The gentleman in red is from the Saskatoon Fire Department. The gentleman in yellow is with the City of Saskatoon Naturalized Parks Program. You can see, we're controlled. We built the box. We keep the flame length low, and we're managing that site to be nice and safe. So Jessie had mentioned the Northeast Swale. So this is an ecological complex of wetlands, grasslands, and rocky ridges that start within the city limits and extend northeast of Saskatoon for 26 kilometers. And we got over 200 bird species documented on the site and about 15 species at risk as well. So it's a real ecological gem within the city limits. Back in 2015, Meewasin worked with the city of Saskatoon on developing a master plan for this site. And what the master plan wanted to do was incorporated conserving the site and the conservation values, but also trying to balance that human use of the site as well. And so looking at ways to engage the public, to get public on the site to recreate in it, but also learn about the site, tie in school programming, but also use natural infrastructure for stormwater management and other factors within those surrounding neighborhoods. The master plan was written so that we can apply it to multiple, as the swale extends or the site extends outside city limits as the city grows, we can apply it to other parts of the site. And also the lot of information that we are using in the master plan was tied to the small swale natural area management plan that Jessie spoke about. One of the things within the master plan, we talked about a greenway. And so this is actually between the neighborhood and the natural area, designing it so that you have back of lot, sort of a functional space for stormwater management, for recreational use for pathways, dark sky friendly lighting along the trailway, and then you have your natural space behind it. And so the city has worked on this project for several years. And so this is an air photo from Google Earth of this spring. You can see that pathway on the back of lot. You can see the trail that goes in through the Northeast Swale and that connectivity for the neighborhood, but also meeting those ecological functions, but also those natural infrastructure functions as well. Also, we do a lot of restoration work at the swale. So this is along Fedoric Drive. The road was actually twinned a couple of years ago. And now we're working on that sort of that buffer between that. Really poor soil conditions, super hot conditions because we're in the middle of a drought. And so we're doing different features on managing erosion, but also we're adding pollinator beds, shrub beds, and then also planting native grass along there as part of our restoration project. Chuck mentioned the floating island. We've worked with multiple partners, including the City of Saskatoon and South Sask River watershed stewards, to install in one of the storm ponds in the Northeast Swale floating wetland system to try and remove nutrients and materials out of the storm pond before it enters the South Saskatchewan River. Also, we're integrating that fire and management and grazing management on that site and using it to enhance that site for species at risk, reduce wildfire risk as well, and also educating the public about the value of grazing. And we deliver a lot of school programs with our shepherd on that site and public programs that talk about the use of grazing as a management tool in grassland ecosystems. One of the things that we've created with funding from the Weston Family Foundation is a prairie-wide collaborative called the Canadian Prairies Prescribed Fire Exchange to bring people together to learn about prescribed fire and how to apply it safely on the landscape for good fire. And within that organization, we are helping agencies and individuals and producers apply fire on that landscape. We provide training opportunities, and we also share science and knowledge about the use of fire as well. So we're just wrapping up our 5-year cycle, our first 5-year program with the Fire Exchange, and we're looking at the next 5 years on trying to advance prescribed fire. So managing these systems is very important, and using all the different tools available to keep these ecosystems functioning, restoring these sites, making them healthy, but you have to maintain them over time to keep them healthy and vibrant. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Renny. Another inspiring presentation about natural infrastructure in practice. We do have some questions online if you want to take a look and see which ones. And in the meantime, if I see one other person standing in the room, but we'll take online first. If there's one that you want to address from the.
Okay, so I'll cover the one about seed sourcing and locally adapted seeds for restoration work. So that's actually a project multiple organizations are looking at in agencies and individuals, is trying to source localized seed for the restoration projects. And that's one of the challenges that we have. Chuck mentioned with Ducks Unlimited back in the day with Native Plant Solutions, they were working on a program of ecovars to source native grass seed to meet the restoration needs. And one of the challenges we have in Western Canada, there is a high demand for seed, low supply. And so when there's a project that's needed, quite often that seed is brought in from outside of Canada, usually from Southern United States, not locally adapted. And so there's different groups that are working together, and seed producers and agencies trying to find ways to expand that supply requirements, and then but also work with people that want native seed to sort of start planning years in advance. You have to think about these species that, like if you're wanting to plant native trees or native shrubs or wildflowers, like individual plants, it takes 2 to 3 years to get those plants ready. Like from a wildflower, you collect the seed, you start it, it takes a year, and then you sell it, right? Or if you're looking at seed production plots, it could take 3 to 4 years to get those ready. So working with those consumers to try and build those forward contracting opportunities and understanding to try and increase that supply. Seed producers are really interested in trying to get the product out to people, but we need the time to do that. So, and then also we see these upsurges in demand, and then also we see crashes as well. So it's a really unstable form of farming. So
thank you, Renny. Question in the room?
Yeah, hey Renny. I'm sure you've thought about this before, so I'm just wondering if you can tell us a bit about, when it comes to prescribed burning, the risk of, the benefit of managing invasive species with fire as compared to the carbon output or the greenhouse gas emissions when it comes to fire, and if you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. That's a great question. So and so there's we do get a lot of questions about that. So one thing to think of is our boreal forest. So a boreal forest, 90% of the growth is above ground, 10% underground. So when there's a wildfire that comes through, you have this massive release of carbon. Grasslands, on the other hand, is about 80% underground. So that root system is underground, and what you see above ground is 10 to 20%. So the amount of carbon released off of that burn is, quite smaller because that carbon is stored underground. However, you do have that carbon release. So some of the research that we're working with the University of Saskatchewan is looking at what is the regrowth of these grasses post-fire. And what we're finding is some of the research is showing that is that increase in root biomass right after the fire. The roots start, the fire regenerates that root system. And within the research is starting to show that within 2 years, we're actually capturing more carbon from that grass post-fire than what was being released. And so we're seeing that equation or that balance actually being a net positive post-fire. One of the things to remember too with a prescribed fire is we're not burning under those extreme conditions where we're getting that total loss of vegetation. You still have that grassroot crown, you still have some of that litter on the ground as well. And so you're not releasing as much carbon. So we are doing the research to determine, how much carbon we're releasing and then how much we're putting back. So thanks, Allison, for the question.
I think we're out of time. I'm getting the
Yep.
all done sign from Asha. Thank you. Thank you, Renny, for a great presentation. I want to take the opportunity to thank Chuck, Jessie, and Renny. Clearly, in this part of the world, natural infrastructure is being normalized. It's really inspiring to see all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.